This is my true story. I worked my whole life so my son could live a better one. I built businesses from the ground up, saved every cent, and gave him every opportunity I never had. But as I got older, he stopped seeing me as a father. He started treating me like a burden. One evening during dinner, he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. That night changed everything. I stayed calm, but I made a promise to myself. He would learn who he was talking to. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my story can reach more people. It happened on a Friday night. He had invited me to his house for dinner, something that used to be rare but lately had become more of a performance. The dining room was loud with laughter, expensive wine, and the kind of fake conversation people use to impress each other. His wife sat across the table, smiling in that polite, distant way she always did when I spoke. My son talked mostly about himself, his new clients, his growing empire. I listened quietly, not because I cared about the bragging, but because I wanted to see how far he'd gone from the values I once taught him. He talked about his cars, his employees, his success. Then the conversation shifted. His wife asked casually, "So, Dad, how's retirement?" Before I could answer, my son laughed. "Retirement? Please. He's broke. That's why he's always so quiet." The words hit harder than I expected. The room went silent for a second. Then she laughed too, softly at first, then louder when she saw he didn't stop her. I looked at him, the same boy I once carried on my shoulders, now sitting across from me with a smirk that didn't belong to a son but to a stranger. He leaned back in his chair, still laughing. "You should thank me, old man," he said. "You're living easy because I'm the one making money now." The confidence in his voice wasn't strength, it was arrogance born from ignorance. He thought he was untouchable. He thought age meant weakness, that silence meant surrender. He forgot where the first dollar came from. He forgot who taught him how to open his first bank account, who co-signed the loan for his first office, who helped him build the business he now called his own. I didn't speak. I folded my napkin slowly, placed it beside the plate, and looked around the table. Every face had that same uncomfortable expression, half pity, half fear. They didn't know how to react. My son thought my silence was submission. But in reality, I was taking mental notes. Every word, every smirk, every laugh. Not for revenge, but for clarity. Because that moment showed me exactly what kind of man I'd raised. I spent the rest of the meal in silence, letting him talk. He bragged about how his company had grown, how he was expanding into new regions, how old ways of doing business were dead. He even joked about how people from my generation didn't understand modern finance. His wife joined in, throwing glances at me like I was some relic from a forgotten time. I kept a straight face, nodded when needed, but inside, I was remembering something far more important. The original company documents. The ones he never cared to read fully. The ones that still had my name printed in fine ink at the top. When dinner ended, he barely looked at me as I stood to leave. "Drive safe," he said casually, already turning back to his phone. I walked out the door without a word. The cool night air hit me, and I finally exhaled. The words, "you're broke," echoed in my head like a drumbeat. It wasn't the insult itself that hurt. It was the disrespect, the ungratefulness, the sheer blindness of a man who thought wealth erased history. I drove home slowly that night. The city lights blurred past the windshield, but my mind was somewhere else. Back to the days when he was a child, helping me count cash in the shop. Back to the first deal we made together. Back to when he still looked at me with pride instead of pity. Somewhere along the way, the lessons stopped sticking. Somewhere along the way, the success I helped him build turned him into someone who thought love was weakness and respect was optional. When I reached home, I sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. The house was quiet, the same way it always had been since his mother passed. I looked around and realized that everything I owned, every chair, every photo, every brick, had been bought with work he'd never understand. And yet, to him, I was broke. That night, as I took off my jacket, I made a silent promise. I wouldn't argue, I wouldn't shout, I wouldn't remind him of what he owed me. Instead, I'd let him feel what it's like to be powerless, not through words, but through reality. He thought he had everything because of what he saw in his bank account. Soon, he'd learn that true ownership doesn't come from numbers. It comes from control. And he had forgotten who still had it. The insult was done. The pride was his. But the power? That still belonged to me. When I got home that night, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, the sound of the clock ticking louder than usual. The words, "You're broke," kept replaying in my head, not because of the insult itself, but because of what it revealed. My son didn't just lose respect for me, he'd forgotten who I was. The man who raised him, taught him, and built the company that gave him the life he bragged about was now nothing more than an old man in his eyes. I sat there in the quiet, feeling a mix of disappointment and calm calculation. There's something about silence that gives you power. It clears the noise and makes you think straight. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Years of work had made me patient, and that patience became my strength. I went to my study, unlocked the old drawer that hadn't been touched in years, and pulled out the files I had kept for someday. My son thought I'd left the business world behind completely. What he didn't know was that I never really left. I just stopped needing to be seen. Inside the drawer were the original incorporation papers, partnership deeds, old contracts, and share certificates from the early years. The company he now owned had started under my registration. He had taken it over later, but not completely. There were shares still tied to my name. It wasn't a large amount, not enough to control, but enough to influence, enough to start something. I looked at those documents and felt the weight of history sitting in my hands. Every signature was a reminder that the empire he stood on was built with my ink, my sweat, my time. I spent hours going through each file carefully, line by line. Some papers were yellowed with age, others were crisp and new. I traced back every transaction, every stock movement, every change in ownership. He had moved fast over the years, expanding, merging, and growing. But in that speed, he'd left cracks in the system. Forgotten clauses, open rights, dormant shares, small things that meant nothing to him, but everything to someone who knew where to look. I smiled faintly. He had been careless, and I had been patient. That combination always favors the quiet man. By 3 a.m., my desk was covered in papers. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat down again, and started writing notes. Names, account numbers, company addresses, contact details. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning a lesson, one that would hit harder than any argument ever could. When morning came, I got dressed like I used to. Suit, tie, polished shoes. It had been years since I looked that formal, but it felt right. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving the house and thought, this is the man he called broke. I drove downtown to the law office of a man I'd known for decades, the same lawyer who helped me build everything from scratch. He was surprised to see me. "It's been a while," he said. I nodded and placed the folder on his desk. "I need your help," I said plainly. "I want to know the ownership structure of my son's company. Every share, every partner, every transfer." He looked at me for a long second, then opened the folder and began flipping through the pages. As he read, his eyebrows lifted. "You still have rights here," he said finally. He never completed full separation. "Legally, you're still a major shareholder." I leaned back in my chair. "Good," I said. "Then let's make that count." That day, we spent hours reviewing details, drafting inquiries, checking registries, and reaching out to silent partners who still owed me favors. By evening, the path was clear. My son thought he owned everything, but the truth was simpler. He was standing on borrowed ground. When I got home that night, I didn't feel tired. I felt focused. The silence had given me direction. I didn't need to raise my voice or seek revenge. All I needed to do was remind him, through action, who he had underestimated. He thought my silence meant defeat. He didn't realize it was strategy. Some wars are won before they're even fought, and mine had already begun. That night, even after sorting through every paper, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the room lit only by the dim glow of the streetlight outside. The house was silent, but my mind wasn't. Every word from that dinner kept replaying. The tone in his voice, the smirk on his face, the laughter that followed. "You're broke." The insult itself wasn't new. I'd been called worse in my years of hard work. But hearing it from my own son, the same boy who once ran to me for help when his life was falling apart, hit deeper than anything a stranger could say. It wasn't just disrespect. It was betrayal disguised as confidence. I thought about everything I'd done for him. The times I stayed up late finishing projects so he could have school fees on time. The times I ate leftovers so he could eat fresh. The car I sold to help him start his business. The bank loans I guaranteed in his name. I never saw those sacrifices as debts he had to repay. I did them because that's what a father does. But sitting there now, I realized how easily he had erased all of that from his memory. To him, success had rewritten history. He believed he made it alone. He believed he was self-made. I got up, walked into the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, wrinkles deeper, eyes duller. Not because of age, but because of disappointment. The kind of disappointment that doesn't explode. It sinks, quietly, into your bones. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around the glass, thinking about how money changes people. It doesn't corrupt them instantly. It just makes them forget gratitude $1 at a time. I remembered the early days when we started the business together. He was fresh out of college, unsure, ambitious, but lost. I was still working every day, managing contracts, chasing clients. I taught him how to talk to suppliers, how to handle people, how to build trust. He was impatient back then, always wanting quick success. But I guided him through every mistake, every setback, every loss. Slowly, the business grew. And the more it grew, the less he needed my advice. He stopped asking for help. Then he stopped listening altogether. Eventually, he started pretending he built it alone. That's the danger of success without humility. It blinds a man until he can't even see the hands that built his foundation. My son had reached that stage. He didn't just think he was better than me. He believed he had outgrown me. That's what made the insult sting the most. Not because it hurt my pride, but because it showed how completely he'd lost his sense of respect. By the time the clock hit 3 a.m., I was done feeling sad. The anger had faded, replaced by something sharper. Resolve. I didn't raise my voice at him during dinner because I knew shouting wouldn't change him, but action could. I realized the only way to teach him was through reality, not words. He lived in a world of numbers and status, so I would speak to him in a language he understood, ownership and power. I stood up, went back to my study, and looked at the folder on the desk. It was thick with documents, signatures, and records of everything we had built together. My name was still printed at the top of many of them. I traced it with my finger, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. I hadn't lost anything. I had simply stepped away for a while. And now, it was time to step back in. The insult didn't break me. It woke me up. It reminded me that sometimes, people only respect what they can't control. My son thought I was old and finished, but I still had the one thing he didn't: experience. The kind of quiet experience that knows how to strike without noise. By sunrise, I felt calm again. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, stood on the porch, and watched the first light hit the street. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. What remained was focus. That was the moment I decided. I wouldn't try to earn his respect back. I'd make him lose his arrogance first. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. My coffee tasted stronger than usual, maybe because my purpose was clear now. I put on the same gray suit I used to wear during my working years, the one that still fit perfectly, even after all this time. My son thought I'd stopped being a businessman when I retired, but you never stop being what you built. You just learn to move quieter. I picked up the thick folder of company papers and left the house. I drove across town to the same law firm I'd trusted for more than 30 years. The receptionist recognized me right away. "It's been a long time, sir," she said. I nodded. "Too long." Within minutes, I was sitting in front of my lawyer, A man who'd seen me through every major decision of my career. He was older now too, but still sharp. When I explained the situation, he didn't laugh or look surprised. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "I always told you to keep your originals." I slid the folder across his desk. "Tell me exactly who owns what," I said, "and how much control I still have." He began reading through the documents, slowly, carefully, methodically. After half an hour, he looked up and gave a small smile. "He never completed a full ownership transfer," he said. "You still hold 40% in dormant shares through the parent registration. It's enough to request voting rights. Technically, you're still a founding stakeholder." I sat back, letting that sink in. My son had always been reckless with paperwork. He rushed everything, focused more on appearances than details. He thought I'd signed everything away years ago, but I hadn't. I'd kept my portion untouched, out of habit, not strategy. Back then, it didn't mean much, but now it meant everything. "Can we make a move with this?" I asked. My lawyer nodded. "You could buy the remaining controlling shares easily," he said, "especially now that the company's stock value is fluctuating. He's over-leveraged. Too much debt, not enough liquidity. You'd be doing the shareholders a favor." That sentence hit me like a quiet lightning bolt. My son's company wasn't as stable as he pretended. His expansion had been built on loans, not profits. He was balancing on a tower made of borrowed bricks, and the foundation still had my name on it. We spent the next few hours laying out a strategy. It wasn't revenge. It was precision. We made calls to small shareholders who still remembered me, people who had worked with me before he took over. Many of them still respected me. Some even owed me favors from decades ago. By lunchtime, the framework was set. Within a week, I could legally and discreetly acquire enough control to hold majority power. It would be quiet, legal, and clean. I left the law office with a strange calmness in my chest. The city felt different that day, slower, lighter, like the world was shifting back into place. My phone buzzed once while I was walking back to my car. It was my son. A group chat notification. He had just posted another photo, a smiling selfie with his wife beside one of his new cars, captioned, "Hustle never sleeps." I looked at the photo for a few seconds, then locked my phone. He had no idea that the ground under him was already moving. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my notes, rereading everything twice. Every document was in order, every plan airtight. It wasn't about pride anymore. It was about correction, setting things back to how they should have been. My son had forgotten that the empire he flaunted came from a man who once built everything with nothing but calloused hands and long nights. He thought he'd risen above me, but all he'd done was climb higher on my shoulders, and now it was time for me to step aside and let him feel what a fall really is. I called my lawyer one last time before bed. "Start the process tomorrow," I said, quietly. He replied simply, "It's already in motion." That night, I slept without interruption for the first time in weeks. The insult no longer echoed in my head. Instead, there was silence, the kind that comes when you've stopped being angry and started being in control again. My son had power, but I had something far stronger: proof. And in this world, proof always wins. The week that followed felt almost too calm, the kind of calm that comes before something big happens. My son went on with his life as if nothing had changed. He posted photos online with hashtags about success and grind mode. He attended events, smiled for cameras, and gave speeches about leadership and building from the ground up. Every image, every word, every laugh made me realize just how far removed he was from reality. He didn't know that while he was showing off his cars and his suits, I was already taking back the company that funded them. From the outside, everything looked perfect for him. His friends congratulated him for another big year. His wife uploaded vacation photos, showing off luxury hotels and champagne breakfasts. I watched it all from my quiet living room, sipping my morning coffee. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I just waited. Because I knew something he didn't: that peace can be the sharpest weapon when used with patience. Every morning, I spoke with my lawyer. The plan was moving fast. Within days, the legal filings had been submitted. The trust was established, the shares transferred, and the acquisition offer prepared. By Wednesday, my name was quietly re-entered into the shareholder records. No announcements, no headlines, no leaks. Everything was done with precision. My son had built his entire identity on being the man in charge, the visionary CEO. But the real power wasn't in the spotlight. It was in the paperwork sitting in drawers, hidden from his view. On Thursday, I stopped by the company headquarters for the first time in years. I didn't go inside. I just parked across the street and watched the building. It had grown. New glass walls, new logos, a larger parking lot filled with cars I helped him buy years ago. Through those tinted windows, I could see employees moving around, busy and unaware. To them, my son was still the boss. But I knew the truth. Within a few days, that building would belong to someone else. To me. That night, he called me. Not to apologize or ask how I was doing, just to brag. "Dad, you should have seen the deal I closed today," he said. "Multi-million-dollar expansion. You should come by the office sometime. Maybe I'll give you a tour." I said little, just listened, letting him feel comfortable. Every word he spoke confirmed that he still saw me as the old man who had fallen behind. He didn't know that the same expansion deal he was celebrating had been flagged in the documents I now controlled. He didn't know I could end it with a single signature. After that call, I didn't feel anger. I felt satisfaction, not because I was about to win, but because I had stayed silent long enough to watch arrogance defeat itself. My son had spent years chasing approval from people who would disappear the second he stumbled. He had mistaken applause for loyalty. I had built my life on patience, and that patience was now paying off. By Friday, the final paperwork was ready. The acquisition was disguised under a private trust, meaning he wouldn't know who the buyer was until it was finalized. It was clean, legal, and impossible to stop. I signed the last page at noon, and the lawyer looked up at me. "Once this clears," he said, "you'll have controlling interest." I nodded, calm and steady. The transaction would go through on Monday morning. I had waited decades for him to respect me. One more weekend wouldn't hurt. Over the next 2 days, I went about life as usual. I fixed the gate, mowed the lawn, met some old friends for coffee. But beneath that routine, I was watching closely, waiting for the exact moment the world he stood on began to crack. On Sunday night, I checked my phone before bed. He had just posted a photo of himself holding a glass of wine with the caption, "Never forget who's really in charge." I smiled. "You'll remember soon enough," I thought. I turned off the lights and slept better than I had in years. Because the truth is, there's no satisfaction greater than quiet control, especially when it belongs to the one everyone counted out. My son thought he was living his best week. He didn't know it was his last one at the top. Monday came with the same stillness as any other day. But I knew it wasn't. This was the day everything would change. I woke up early, had my coffee, ironed my shirt, and went through the plan one more time. Every document had been signed, every clause checked, every piece of the puzzle was in its place. The lawyer called around 9 a.m. "It's happening today," he said. "Once the funds clear, the transfer is official." I didn't reply with excitement. I just said, "Good." Because this wasn't about celebration. It was about restoration. At 10:30 a.m., I was at the bank. I signed the last authorization form that allowed the trust under my name to finalize the acquisition. It took less than 10 minutes, faster than ordering breakfast. The woman behind the counter smiled politely and said, "Congratulations, sir." I nodded, calm. She had no idea what that signature meant. That single stroke of a pen just changed the entire hierarchy of my son's life. He didn't know yet, but the company he called his would soon have a new owner, me. The process was seamless. Within the next few hours, my lawyer sent me the confirmation files. Ownership transfer complete. The trust now held full controlling shares, and I was the beneficiary. The board had already approved the sale, thinking it was just another investor buyout. My son had signed off on it himself, without even reading the fine print. He thought he was expanding. He was actually selling his company. To me. When I received the final confirmation email, I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. There was no anger, no rush of adrenaline, no sense of revenge, just peace. I thought about how long it had taken me to reach this point, decades of work, sacrifice, patience, and all it took was silence and timing to win it all back. Meanwhile, my son was living his usual morning. He was probably at the office, barking orders, talking big numbers, and pretending to be invincible. He didn't know that the ground beneath him had shifted hours ago. Around noon, I called my lawyer again. "When will he find out?" I asked. "By afternoon," he said. "Once the board convenes, they'll inform him." I thanked him, hung up, and poured myself another coffee. Then I waited. At 3 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the finance system we used years ago. Automatic updates tied to the main account. The company name had changed under new ownership. My ownership. The transaction was done. The trust was active. Every legal form had cleared. My son's company, the same company he had mocked me for not understanding, was now under my name again. I walked outside, sat on the porch, and looked at the trees swaying in the afternoon wind. I thought about how simple it all was. No shouting, no fighting, no chaos. Just quiet action. People like my son believe that success comes from loudness, from making noise, being seen, demanding attention. But I learned long ago that real power moves in silence. Later that evening, I received a short text from my lawyer. "It's official. You're the sole owner," I replied with one word. "Understood." Then I turned off my phone and sat back. The sun was setting, and everything felt still again. The balance of life had returned. The man who once laughed at me, who said, "You're broke," was now unknowingly working for me. I imagined him sitting in his office, unaware, probably planning meetings and approving budgets like nothing had changed. Soon, he would realize he wasn't in charge anymore. Soon, he would be called into a board meeting, handed papers he didn't see coming, and told that his position was no longer required. As I finished my coffee, I thought about how strange life can be. 1 week earlier, he had mocked me at the dinner table. Now, I owned the very company that gave him that confidence. All because he never respected the foundation he was standing on. 3 meetings, 2 signatures, 1 decision, that's all it took. By nightfall, the company he had called his empire was officially mine again. And the best part? He still didn't know. I smiled, not out of spite, but out of peace. Not every victory needs noise. Some victories whisper. And those are the ones that last forever. It happened the next afternoon. Around 2:15 p.m., my lawyer called me and said, "It's time." I knew what that meant. The board meeting was starting. My son was about to discover that everything he thought he owned no longer belonged to him. I didn't go to the office. I didn't need to. I wanted him to hear it from the same people he used to command, the same ones he used to talk down to like servants. Sometimes the lesson hits harder when pride has an audience. At 2:45 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A text message. From him. "Dad, something's wrong. The board just voted me out. They said there's a new owner. I don't understand what's happening." I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then set the phone down. I didn't reply. I wanted him to sit in the confusion for a while, to feel what I had felt the night he humiliated me. Back then, I sat in silence while he laughed. Now, it was his turn to sit in silence while I stayed calm. Later that day, I received another call, this time from one of the board members I'd known for decades. He said, "He's in shock. He didn't see it coming. When they told him the company had been sold, he kept saying it had to be a mistake." I asked if he had seen the buyer's name yet. The man paused for a moment and said, "Not yet. But he will soon. The paperwork's being handed to him now." I thanked him, hung up, and waited. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was my son. His voice was shaking, a mix of anger and disbelief. "Dad, did you buy my company?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own question. He repeated it, louder this time. "Did you do this?" Finally, I said, "You'll find all the answers in the paperwork." And then I hung up. That was all. No shouting, no lectures, no emotion. Just a simple truth. He could read what he had ignored for years. My name. From what I heard later, the room went completely silent when he saw the final page. The trust name, the owner's signature, the date, my name. He sat there frozen, staring at it like it was written in another language. The board members didn't know what to say. The man who had walked in every Monday bragging about dominance now sat small, pale, speechless. They said his wife called during the meeting, and he didn't even answer. He just kept whispering, "How?" I wasn't there, but I could picture it clearly. The same confidence that used to fill every room now cracked wide open. His pride, his arrogance, all of it gone in one moment. He must have remembered the night he mocked me, the words, "You're broke," ringing back in his head like a cruel echo. But now, there was no laugh to follow it. Just silence. Later that evening, when he finally came to see me, I was sitting on the porch. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, eyes red, hands trembling. He didn't storm in like he used to. He stood there for a moment, trying to form words. "Dad, why?" he said finally. I looked at him, calm as ever, and replied, "Why not?" He tried to speak again, but nothing came out. I didn't shout, didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Some victories speak for themselves. He sat down across from me, still trying to process it. "You bought it?" "All of it?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "I didn't steal it," I said. "I bought it. The same way I built it." That sentence landed harder than anything else. For the first time in years, he had no comeback, no smug remark, no pride left to hide behind. He just looked down at the ground. We sat there in silence for a long time. The same kind of silence we hadn't shared since he was a boy sitting next to me in the workshop, helping me fix broken tools. Back then, he respected me. Back then, he still listened. Now the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, filled with everything he'd broken and everything I'd quietly rebuilt. Before he left, he said softly, "I never thought you'd do this." I looked at him and replied, "That's because you never thought I could." He nodded, eyes glassy, and walked back to his car without another word. The sound of the door closing echoed through the evening. When he drove away, I sat there for a long time, watching the sun set over the yard. I didn't feel revenge or joy. I felt closure. The same man who once told me I was broke had just learned that age doesn't erase strength. It sharpens it. The next morning, I arrived at the company building for the first time in more than a decade. The same place I once helped build from the ground up now stood taller, shinier, and colder. As I walked through the glass doors, the receptionist froze. She must have recognized me from the old framed photo in the lobby, the one my son never bothered to remove. "Good morning, sir," she said nervously. I nodded and walked toward the elevator. The sound of my shoes echoed across the marble floor, each step a reminder that the man they thought was finished had just returned to reclaim his own name. Upstairs, the atmosphere was tense. Word had already spread that the company had a new owner. Some employees stood whispering in small groups. Others pretended to work, stealing glances at me as I passed by. No one said a word. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor, the same one my son used to boast about owning. When I stepped out, his secretary stood up instantly. "He's inside, sir," she said quietly. Her tone had changed. Respect replaces arrogance fast when power shifts hands. I opened the door and found him sitting behind the massive oak desk, head in his hands. The same desk I'd picked for him years ago when we first moved into this building. He looked up, startled. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he stood up slowly. His tie was crooked, his eyes bloodshot, his expression hollow. The confidence that once filled this office had drained completely. "Dad," he began, his voice thin, almost trembling. I didn't answer right away. I walked past him, stood by the window, and looked out over the city. It was a bright morning. The kind of day that usually inspired people to chase success. For him, it was the day success ran out. I turned back toward him. "Sit," I said simply. He hesitated, then sat down, his hands clenched together. On the desk lay a folder. I placed the termination papers on top of it. "The board has accepted your resignation," I said. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. His throat tightened. He picked up the paper with shaking hands and stared at the letterhead. My name was printed clearly at the top, Owner and Chief Executive Officer. He swallowed hard. "You can't do this," he whispered. I didn't raise my voice. "I already did." He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "Why?" he asked, voice cracking. I kept my eyes steady. "Because this company was never yours to destroy," I said. "You forgot who built it, who gave you the start, who trusted you with everything." He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I made it better," he muttered weakly. I shook my head. "No. You made it loud. There's a difference." Silence filled the room. The ticking clock on the wall was the only sound. I could see his pride breaking piece by piece. He looked smaller now, almost like the young boy I used to teach to count change at the shop counter decades ago. I remembered how he used to look up at me with admiration back then. Now, he couldn't look at me at all. Finally, I walked around the desk and stood across from him. I picked up the pen from his hand and placed it on the paper. "Sign," I said. His eyes flickered with anger, then defeat. Slowly, he signed his name at the bottom. When he finished, I picked up the document, folded it neatly, and placed it inside my briefcase. "You told me I was broke," I said quietly. "Now I'm the man signing your paycheck." Life has a way of correcting arrogance. He stared at the floor. I could see his jaw trembling. I didn't need to say more. Lessons like this don't need long speeches. They need silence and truth. I turned to leave. As I reached the door, I paused. "You're still my son," I said without turning around. "But that doesn't mean you're entitled to what I built. You'll have to earn it now." Then I walked out, leaving him alone in the office he no longer owned. The elevator ride down felt lighter. Employees nodded respectfully as I passed. Some even smiled, small, knowing smiles. They had seen the change happen quietly, without chaos, without scandal. That's how real power moves. When I stepped outside, the sun was warm. The same street where he once laughed at me now felt like solid ground again. I stood there for a while, breathing in the morning air, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: balance. Justice delivered not by anger, but by patience. That afternoon, I received a message from him. "I'll start over. I don't know how, but I will." I didn't reply. Starting over was the best thing that could happen to him. Maybe losing everything would finally teach him to respect what he once took for granted. After that day, my life returned to a rhythm I hadn't felt in decades. The noise was gone, the tension was gone. Everything was quiet again, steady, peaceful, balanced. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up to phone calls asking for help, for loans, for advice that would later be ignored. I woke up early, made my coffee, and sat on the porch watching the sunrise, just like I used to before the company ever existed. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I was no longer a father begging for respect. I was a man who had taken back what was his, calmly, legally, and without a single raised voice. The employees adjusted quickly. People who used to avoid me out of loyalty to my son now greeted me with warmth and respect. Some even thanked me quietly in passing. "It feels stable again," one of them said one morning as I walked through the office. I nodded. Stability, that was the word I wanted to hear. Under my son, the company had been loud, showy, and disorganized. Money came in fast, but left faster. Now, we were rebuilding, not for pride, but for longevity. I promoted a few loyal managers who had stayed through the chaos. I made sure bonuses were tied to performance, not favors. Within weeks, the environment shifted completely. My son, on the other hand, disappeared from the public eye. His social media accounts went silent. The friends who once filled his weekends with parties stopped showing up. The expensive cars were sold one by one. The big house went up for rent. I didn't ask how he was doing, but every now and then I'd hear small updates. He had started freelancing, consulting, trying to rebuild from scratch. He was learning what it meant to start at the bottom, to live without shortcuts. And though he didn't know it, that was my quiet gift to him. A clean slate. One morning, a few weeks after I'd taken over, he came to visit. He looked different. No suit, no arrogance, no smirk. Just a man carrying the weight of his own mistakes. He stood on the porch for a long moment before knocking. I opened the door and stepped aside. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood there, holding a small envelope. "I wanted to give this back," he said softly. Inside were the keys to the house I had helped him buy years ago. I looked at them, then at him. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't cry. He just nodded, turned around, and walked away. That was the first honest gesture I'd seen from him in years. It wasn't about money. It was about acknowledgement. He finally understood that I hadn't humiliated him. I had taught him. In his own way, he was saying thank you. I placed the keys on the table and left them there. I didn't need them back. What I needed was exactly what I had now: peace. In the months that followed, things continued to improve. The company stabilized, the clients returned, and our reputation grew stronger than ever. When people asked about my son, I never spoke badly of him. I simply said, "He's learning." Because I knew he was. Pain is a better teacher than comfort. He was finally living the lessons I had tried to give him in words. Now, he was learning them through life. I started spending more time with myself. I picked up old hobbies, visited old friends, and even joined a small community club in town. People there didn't care who owned what or how much money anyone had. We just talked, laughed, shared stories. I realized that simplicity is wealth too, one most people overlook chasing the other kind. Every few weeks, my son would send a short message. Simple things like, "Hope you're well," or "Working on a new project." I always replied the same way: "Good. Keep going." We didn't need long conversations. The distance between us wasn't cold anymore. It was respectful. He knew I was watching, and I knew he was trying. Now, every morning when I sit on the porch with my coffee, I think about how everything came full circle. He once mocked me for being broke, and I once stayed silent to keep the peace. But in the end, silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. I didn't destroy him. I simply reminded him who built him. He lost a company but gained something far more valuable: humility. And I gained back my dignity, my peace, and my home. Not bad for a man who was supposedly broke. He once looked me in the eye and said, "You're broke," as if money was the only measure of a man's worth. He thought my silence meant defeat. He thought wrinkles meant weakness. He thought the man who built his foundation had already forgotten how to build anything else. But what he never understood, until it was too late, was that experience doesn't fade with age. It matures, it waits, and it moves when the timing is right. That one sentence he threw at me like an insult became the reason I found myself again. When I look back now, I don't see revenge. I see correction. A correction that life demanded, not out of anger, but out of balance. My son had grown up thinking success was loud, fast, and shiny. He believed being the boss meant talking down to people, especially to the man who had once carried him on his shoulders. So I let him speak. I let him laugh. I let him build himself high enough to think he was untouchable. And then, when he mocked me in front of others, I decided to remind him that you can't build pride on borrowed ground. I didn't ruin him. He did that himself. I simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his arrogance. When I bought his company, I didn't do it to humiliate him. I did it to save what I had built before he destroyed it completely. Because love doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes love is saying, "No more." Sometimes love is drawing a line, even if it breaks your own heart. Now I sit in the same chair every morning, watching the sunrise with peace in my chest. The same peace I used to think I'd never feel again. My son works somewhere else now, quietly, honestly. He's not rich anymore, but I hear he's responsible. He shows up on time, he pays his bills, he doesn't brag, doesn't mock, doesn't forget to say, thank you. Maybe he finally understands that real success isn't about money, it's about dignity. He calls me sometimes not to ask for help, but just to talk. Short calls, calm voices, no pride between us. Once, he even said, "Dad, I get it now." I didn't need to ask what he meant. I already knew. That one sentence was worth more than every dollar he ever made. People often ask me if I feel guilty for what I did. My answer is simple: no. I raised a man who needed to lose everything to finally find himself. I didn't take his company out of revenge. I took it because I couldn't let his arrogance bury the work of a lifetime. I couldn't watch him destroy what generations could have built from. In doing so, I didn't just save the business, I saved him too. Sometimes, I think about that dinner table moment, the way he laughed, the way his wife looked at me like I was invisible. I remember folding my napkin, staying quiet while they mocked me. That silence, I realize now, was the moment I took my power back. Because when a man learns to stop defending himself to those who already stopped listening, he becomes dangerous, not out of anger, but out of control. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't fight in public. I just waited. I waited for arrogance to expose itself. And when it did, I responded with patience, papers, and precision. That's how I won. Not loudly, not emotionally, just effectively. He once thought wealth was something he could flaunt to make me feel small. But I learned long ago that money doesn't define you. How you earn it and what you do with it does. I used mine to build, to teach, and finally, to correct. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone listening, it would be this: never let anyone, not even your own blood, convince you that you're less than what you've built. Age doesn't make you weak. Silence doesn't make you powerless. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove anything anymore. He called me broke. Now he works for someone else, and I own everything he once bragged about. But this story isn't about revenge. It's about respect. The kind you can't buy, can't fake, and can't demand. You earn it. And when he learns that fully, maybe one day we'll sit at another dinner table. Not as rivals, but as men who finally understand each other. Until then, I'll enjoy my coffee, my peace, and my porch. Not with pride, but with quiet satisfaction. Because sometimes, the loudest answer to an insult is success delivered in silence.